Hello, everyone. Welcome to this presentation of the experience of a tour of Buenos Aires that was done in November of last year. My name is Delia Marx. I am originally from Argentina, and I've been running these tours for several years now. For Global Exchange, which is a non-for-profit organization in the West Coast in California, and for WestPac, which is a People's Action Foundation in Westchester, New York, where I live. So the main idea behind these tours is to visit the worker cooperative experience in Argentina, and also, of course, do a little bit more like Paul is going to tell you. So I am very grateful to Paul for doing this presentation tonight, and the other day he did it also in person in the Lower East Side of Manhattan. So he's helping very much to spread the word about this experience that is available to all. If you want to have more information, you can ask Paul. If not, you can look it up at realitytours.org. That's a site from Global Exchange. It's Nada just put it on the chat for all of you to see. And that's where you can see more information about the next tour, which is scheduled for October of this year. So maybe some of you will be willing to come. So Paul was, as I said, I'm very grateful to Paul for doing these presentations, and I let you with him. I don't think he needs much introduction.
No, there's a few people who I don't know, but
okay. So Paul is a retired adult education teacher, and also in his previous years he was a taxi conductor,
driver, not conductor.
Driver. And he's very interested in social action, in social aspects of not only the life in the US and more particularly in New York, but worldwide as well. So, Paul, the floor is yours. Any question? I'm here.
Great, thank you. Yeah, I'm gonna probably be asking you a lot of questions because, you know, my sort of talk is really going to be based on sort of more impressionistic things, and I did learn a lot on the tour. But Delia, you know, is a Argentinian who's, you know, deeply knowledgeable about stuff that I have kind of fairly cursory understanding of. So Delia, feel free to correct me anytime I say something that's not quite right, and I may, you know, ask you to sort of fill in details when I'm feeling a little shaky about something, or if something comes to your mind you think that would be helpful to add, please do. So hi, everybody. Those of you who I know, which is a good portion of the crowd, and those I don't, glad that you're all here. So I think we mentioned this before, but the plan is we'll basically go through the presentation, which is built around a bunch of slides from the trip. And if you have questions that come up or something you're really dying to say during the presentation, you can use the chat to write it in, or you can say hello to each other in the chat for that matter. And then we'll have questions and discussion after the presentation. Hopefully a few more people will join in the process. I'm going to very shortly switch to screen share, which hopefully will work well. Those of you who aren't that familiar with Zoom, it's a way for someone to share stuff that's in their computer with everybody else on the session. So I'm going to do that momentarily. And I guess I just wanted to start on a kind of personal note before we get into the presentation. So this tour was really my first time in Argentina, but I sort of feel connected to Argentina and have for many years, mainly because I've had a number of dear friends who are from Argentina, and they've been part of my life for probably the last, if I can do the math, 40 years or so. So when I got to Buenos Aires, it felt in some ways very familiar to me. But sadly, and let me do the screen share now, and make sure everybody can see this. So sadly, before I start the show, I just wanted to mention that one of my dearest friends from Argentina, Dina Burston, passed away last week. She was a really amazing person, an artist, and I'm gonna hopefully get her picture up here. You know, I would have invited her to this session, but she's no longer with us, and I just wanted to sort of give her spirit a shout out. She was an amazing ceramicist. I have lots of her work in my house here. And I just wanted to sort of dedicate this presentation to Dina, who's been a really special friend. Okay, so now if this works. Can everybody see that?
Yes.
Yes, all right. And we were struggling to see if we could get this stuff on the margins covered over, but haven't been able to. So you'll just have to sort of imagine that it's not there. All right, so yeah, this was a tour focused on worker cooperatives in Argentina, mainly in Buenos Aires and surrounding areas. But you know, we got a sense of at least Buenos Aires, you know, as a city, as a cultural hub, and some of its history beyond the worker co-ops. So I'm going to start and with sort of just giving a very brief mention of the 3 co-ops that we visited that are really going and very vibrant worker-run cooperatives. Also, just want to start by thanking both Global Exchange and Westpac, who sponsored the tour, and Delia in particular, who was really a wonderful, informative, calm, and knowledgeable guide on the tour. So without her, this wouldn't have been possible. All right, so I'm going to start by giving just a little bit of info about the 3 main worker cooperatives that we visited, and then we'll look at them in a little more detail after we sort of take a tour bus through Buenos Aires. So the first one, which all these 3 slides are about, is an agricultural cooperative. What is maybe about 50 miles outside of Buenos Aires, Delia?
Yes.
Something like that. And its specific name is Colonia 20 de Abril, but it's part of a larger nationwide organization, the UTT, or UTT, Unión de Trabajadores de la Tierra, Union of Workers of the Land. And we'll get into more detail about them, but just, they're doing just amazing work in terms of the food they grow and the community they've built. And they're also part of this much larger national network. We also visited a vegetable oil factory, which is called Acetera La Matanza, which I think is the neighborhood that it's located in. And it's a very impressive, large-scale sort of factory production site that is run completely democratically. And I should say that all of the places we visited sort of share some basic, histories and principles, even though each one is unique. And just to name them, that they're all worker-owned and self-managed and democratically run with democratic decision-making processes. They all went through a lot of struggle to get where they are, and they wouldn't have gotten where they were without support from local communities. So they all give back to the local community in very significant ways. And that those things were true really about all of them. And maybe I'll mention now, and I'll have some photos later on, all of them, since there are also now a couple of my adult education colleagues on the session, all of them have, as part of their give back to the community, schools, which are really, in most parts, for adults, like the folks that us in the adult education world have been working with, including people who never graduated high school who are preparing for their version of the GED, the high school equivalency exam. So I felt and all of the folks who were our guides had not finished high school and had gone into those kind of popular education programs based in their work sites. So I thought that was, for me, particularly inspiring. So that's the factory. And in a way, it's quite, it's a quite old facility, but they've really been modernizing their equipment. And then the third place we visited is called, there's another person coming in, called, and tell me if I get this wrong, the Unión Solidaria de Trabajadores. And it's a very interesting project that is based at a former landfill, one time the largest landfill in South America, that for several decades already has been reclaimed for community purposes, parks, and you'll see some of the other things that they do there. Like all of the co-ops we visited, they hit a point where the owner, well, no, it's not true of the agricultural cooperative, that's a somewhat different history, but as in many co-ops, the owners, for various reasons, were not able to or didn't want to keep running the business, and that sort of opened the door for the workers to struggle to be able to continue that work as a cooperative rather than as employees of a company. So that's a quick look at the three places we visited. Why is this not flipping now? Oh, there we go. And this is just one example of their community services. This is like a camp for kids that they built on the the reclaimed land, and it's open to folks from the local community, and most of the workers live in that community. All right, so now we'll switch to a little sort of sense of other dimensions of Buenos Aires that were part of our tour. This is Plaza de Mayo, one of the main central, gathering places and government center in Buenos Aires. Also a very important historical site, which you'll maybe hear a little more about. We visited lots of neighborhoods. This is La Boca, I think. We ate a lot of good food, and this is, most of our tour mates at a worker-run cooperative restaurant, Cervantes, and enjoying a lunch there. We visited several museums. This is from a really interesting museum of props from operas of the Buenos Aires Opera. And really quite fascinating. And then this is from Museum of Latin American Art. I think you'll recognize the artist or artists. And I think, Delia, you can tell me that this is like this painting was bought for the most money of any artwork in Latin America. Yes.
Yes.
And it's hanging in the Museum of Latin American Art in Buenos Aires. We got to catch some tango, you know, a definite cultural marker of Buenos Aires. This is a weekly, I think, tango open to the public gathering in the Kirchner Center, which is a major new cultural center in Buenos Aires. So the main host for our tour was a really wonderful organization, La Vaca, which is a journalists collective. And Sergio Ciancaglini, if I got it, was really our main host. And he's one of the founders and leaders of this journalist collective. Claudia Acuna, who's here with Delia, was another founder who's now sort of shifted her work to focus on women's issues. There's a very active women's movement in Argentina where abortion is now legal. And Claudia has been a leader in women's movements in Buenos Aires, and her talk with us was focused on combating femicide, which I guess is quite a widespread problem in Argentina. These are two of the younger members of La Vaca. Javier, who was kind of an assistant tour guide for us. And then there was a time when Delia really had to step back because one of our tour members was ill, and Javier sort of stepped in as translator and tour guide. And Liliana, who's now the president of La Vaca, of the La Vaca Cooperative. But they were really, you know, La Vaca was really like an anchor for our tour. We had a lot of meetings in their office, and they also put out a really fascinating magazine called MU. So, you know, I don't know if we could have really done the tour without their support and guidance and knowledge and wisdom. Another important reality in Argentina that is important to mention is that, you know, for a number of years in the 1970s and 80s, Argentina had a brutal military dictatorship that disappeared thousands of people. I think the number is something like 30,000, many of them young activists, you know, of my generation and the generation of most of the folks on the call. So we visited one museum based in a former military school, which was one of the main prisons and torture centers during the repression, where some of the victims are memorialized. And then we also went to the weekly sort of vigil demonstration by the Madres, the mothers of the disappeared, which was a very powerful organization that came up during the dictatorship that played a major role in beginning to both reveal what had happened and open up space for eventual democratization. And they have a weekly sort of procession, vigil at the Plaza de Mayo. And like many things in Argentina and other countries, there's been a split in that movement. So this banner is from one of the factions of the Madres, very few of whom are still alive. There are, you know, a few because they're the mothers of the folks who were disappeared in the 70s and 80s. And just to mention that, I guess while we were there, the movie Argentina 1985 was playing throughout Buenos Aires, and it really captures actually the attempt after the dictatorship ended to hold the generals who were accountable, who were responsible, accountable, and a bunch of them went to jail, which is fairly unique. And all of the organizations we visited also honor some of the disappeared, and that awareness of the dictatorship and the disappearance cuts across a lot of segments of Argentinian life. So this is the UST, the landfill co-op, and then this is from the farm, the Cooperative Agricultural Project, honoring those who were disappeared. And this is from the vegetable oil factory. There's graffiti, beautiful murals outside of the factory across the street. So that's just a presence that's real in Argentina, and kind of in the background, but still a very real, part of people's worldview, I guess, is understanding what had happened. I should also say, on a lighter note, another thing that was in the air while we were there is that we were there just before the Football World Cup began. And, Argentina is football, known here as soccer crazy. And Argentina did win the World Cup this year, which I think Delia got to experience while she was there. But we just were present for the buildup, and you could feel the excitement. Okay, so I think, yeah, all right. So that's my kind of broader Buenos Aires tour. So I'm going to start now with a little more detail about each of the co-ops, and I'm going to begin with the one that was the oldest, which is the UST, the landfill cooperative. And I'll hold this slide for a little bit to give a little background about how the very robust reality of worker cooperatives in Argentina got started. So the gentleman in the back next to me is one of the main founders of this co-op, and his son, who's on the far left, is now one of the lead sort of organizers. And they began, I think, in 2001, which is really a key date in Argentinian history, and particularly in the development of the worker cooperative movement and other sort of radical people-powered movements in Argentina. There was a huge economic crisis. Things just totally collapsed. The government, which was not very popular to begin with because of corruption and mismanagement, just could not really control the economy spinning, down the drain. Banks closed, people couldn't get their money, businesses went broke, many of them started closing down, some of them tried to sell off their equipment so they could walk away with some profit, leaving their workers in the dust. And there were all kinds of movements that sprung up. People just took to the streets, assemblies in neighborhoods. One of the main chants was, they should all go. The whole political class was just totally lost any credibility with a large part of the population. And in that vacuum, people started organizing themselves. And one part of that was workers in a wide variety of workplaces just decided to occupy and start, producing what they were producing, or, running whatever it was. It could be a hotel, it could be a newspaper, a bakery. It just became a movement of workers realizing they had no alternative but to start taking over the businesses that the owners had abandoned. And they had a lot of community support. They supported each other, and the UST sort of was part of that initial upsurge. The other places we visited are more recent. So they've been around, basically since 2001, probably took a couple of years to get themselves established. They had been working for a multinational company that had the contract to do the land reclamation, and the company just walked away from the contract. And they had to go through quite a struggle, including against the union that they had belonged to, who just thought they should take severance and be quiet, to get the right to keep working on the reclamation project, but running it democratically as a cooperative. So this is their comedor, their sort of lunchroom, essentially, where workers eat, and where we had a wonderful meal. We got a little lesson in mate making, which is sort of national beverage of Argentina. They have a meeting room, which they're beginning to rent out because the state, which I think it's the state that they have the contract with, has been cutting back on what they're paying, so they need some other income sources. They have an agroecological garden, and I'll talk more about that when we get to the farming cooperative. They take in rescue animals, which was really amazing. Peggy would have been particularly thrilled at that. So we saw some animals behind fences, and they explained these are all rescue animals that we keep. They're connected to a nature preserve with all kind of walking trails. In there is a tribute to Che, who is part of this curious mix of sort of iconic Argentinian figures who are admired, I guess not in this case, not by all of Argentinian society, but you have Che, and then you have the football stars, Lionel Messi and Maradona. You have Pope Francis, who's from Argentina. So it's just a very interesting mix of sort of iconic figures whose faces every Argentinian knows. This is a picnic area, again, open to the public. And then they've built these amazing sports facilities for local community use. So this is a gymnasium. This is a hockey field, a women's hockey field, because they wanted to make sure to have sports facilities available to women as well as men. And then this is a classroom that really caught my heart. So the saying up here, and correct my translation if I get it wrong, education doesn't change the world, it changes the people who are going to change the world. And the classroom was like filled with sort of posters created by the students, and I guess they had been studying the theme of violence. I don't know if you can see this poster on the right, but this was about institutional violence, but they had different kinds of violence: sexual violence, police violence. So that was just very inspiring to me. For some reason, sometimes, there we go. There's another collage. Okay, so now I'm switching to the UTT, the farming cooperative. And here too, there are a lot of kind of murals and paintings that capture their worldview and their spirit. And for those who don't know Spanish, this is land, work, and social change. So that's kind of the spirit that informs what they do. They have amazing growing facilities, hothouses. This was our main guide for our Tour de France, holding a beet, I think that is. But the produce that they grow is really fresh and amazing. They practice very proudly what they call agroecology. They don't use any chemicals for pest control. And there's a very rich research base throughout Latin America, and Cuba being one of the main places where it takes place, that's developing non-chemical ways to control various pests. And they were very proud that they don't use chemicals. And in fact, the municipality that they're part of has banned chemical use in agriculture. And the idea is to try to use things that will scare insects away rather than kill them en masse. They have a store, a market, you saw the outside of it in the beginning slides, with produce that they grew, as well as things from other agricultural cooperatives that are part of their national network. And they try to price it as low as possible so that it can be affordable to the local community. So local folks can come and get really affordable fresh vegetables there. I'm gonna say what I think was that they're organized with each family member, of which I think there are 20 family members, has the equivalent, no, I forget if it's a hectare or an acre, and I always forget what the relationship between hectares and acres are, but each family has a piece of land. What they grow, they get to keep 5%, and the rest they give to the cooperative. Some of that goes to the store. Some of it goes to help the local community, like food, soup kitchens and things like that. And then some of it they sell in farmers markets in Buenos Aires. And I think there's a number of them throughout Buenos Aires. So it's a really interesting model. This is another shot inside the store with another mural, which you can see the top of it, basically saying land belongs to those who work it. And finally, this is now the vegetable oil factory, La Matanza. Another view of the outside. You can see some very old structures and some new structures as well. They've only been around for 6 years, so and they've really developed an amazing functioning, I guess profitable, if you want to use that word, business. I think now they're up to 100 and maybe trying to get to 120 families who essentially are part of the cooperative and are surviving and thriving from what they produce and sell. A lot of their sales are to local municipalities. So they sort of have a built-in market in a way, I think, which really helps them. They also fight for laws throughout the country that will make worker cooperatives more viable and more secure. And they are part of one of several organizations in the country that support worker cooperatives. This one, the MNAAR, which is I won't even try to capture it, but it's basically focused specifically on workplaces that have been recuperated, that the workers who had formerly been employees took over. And as is the case with many such workplaces, the workers here had to go through a lot of struggle to be able to get the right to keep what had been an abandoned factory going as a, as a viable business and a support for the families. They have an assembly that makes basic decisions and an administrative committee. They're able to, to give viable wages to all of the members. They have health insurance, they have vacations. It's a really quite impressive operation. So one thing to mention, and this is one of the great mysteries of Argentina to many of us. So these workers and many workers in Argentina define themselves as Peronists. Juan Perón and his wife Eva Perón, are really still adored figures for a large part of the Argentinian population, and really particularly the working class, which just shapes Argentinian politics in fairly unique ways. And I still don't quite understand what Peronism is and why it has such a hold on the population, but it certainly does. And the current government also defines itself as Peronist, and you can see that Perón is still an honored figure. These folks. So these are just a few scenes of, in their office, and their it's one of our tour members, Gonzalo, with the person who was our main sort of guide there, Raul. And we had some really good, important conversations. And even though this didn't capture the moment, one thing I wanted to mention is that at some point, Delia gently called out that, this is almost an entirely male all the workers with a section of a couple in the office are men. And it was an interesting back and forth where Raul acknowledged, yeah, there's some machismo here. We got some cultural changes that we have to go through. But, like I guess most factories, not necessarily all of them in this country, was a really totally male workforce. Just a couple of more scenes from the production line, and another meeting here. Okay, these are all just, all right. And they also have like a market, a popular market, and a sort of cultural bar and little cafe that's open to the public. They do a lot of community support work. Also, they have a school. They support soup, sort of mutual aid kind of soup kitchens. And these are I guess the sort of coordinators of that store. And also, I don't know if, I guess classes are held here, so they have a little library. And I guess just one thing to say to wrap up that maybe I meant to say earlier, that this is kind of my impression, and maybe Delia can sort of comment on it or add to it, that, a lot of the movement that led to this very rich reality of worker cooperatives and other kind of alternative economic structures in Argentina grew out of the crisis when the entire established order collapsed and lost total credibility with the population. And these cooperatives all were formed out of real struggle. It wasn't just, workers got a nice idea, went to the court and got a right to run their business. It was really sometimes pitched battles in the streets, and other, folks from the neighborhood, folks from the community, folks from other cooperatives turning out to like protect workers inside a workplace from police raids. And there was a feeling in those years, I think among at least quite a number of people, that they really were building a whole new idea of how to organize society. And there's a term, horizontalism, that I think came out of that, which really means we don't look to the top, to the government, to organize things. We build from the ground up and connect with each other horizontally. Over time, I think the government was, number one, another old friend joining in. The government was able to kind of calm things down, give some concessions, give some recognition to worker co-ops, even give some support. So things are much more I don't know, kind of normalized in a way. And you don't have that same sense of immediate insurgency. And I think a lot of the co-ops and a lot of the movements around them are sort of having to negotiate what is their relationship to the government, even when it's a fairly supportive government like the present one. And there are people who really are very skeptical of depending on the government, but others who feel like we really need this kind of support if we're going to survive and build the movement. Okay, so that's my tour. I will stop the screen share and hopefully see everybody face to face again. No, not that. Stop share. Where are you?
No, you stopped.
Yeah, you did.
I did. Okay,
Yeah,
so
yeah. So there was it's just the view is highlighting you, but it's not a screen share.
Okay.
But people can change the view. Yeah.
Okay, now we got it.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. There were a few comments in the chat. That's my job to keep track. So I think they're all from Nada. And she says, is that the honor system for farmers to keep 5% of the produce and then give the rest to the co-op?
You mean, is it enforced in any way? Delia?
No, Nada.
No, but Delia would be able to answer it better than me, I think.
Well, I'm not sure of that because you are really a very good learner, Paul. You are an excellent, you explained it in an excellent way. So thank you very much for this explanation. I really appreciate it. And I really think that you have been doing a wonderful job of summarizing and capturing a lot of nuisance that was present during the tour. So really, thank you very much, Paul. In terms of the question, that basically these people, this is a colony. So they all have 1 hectare, which I think it is 2 acres, but I'm not 100% sure. Each one, and they are neighbors. They all see what everybody is doing. They're living together. So yes, it's the honor system, and I don't think that they need any kind of supervision in that sense. They know exactly what each one of them is growing, and they help one another. And little by little, they're building their homes, which is also something that they're very grateful about, because up to before, when they were renting a place, and they are not allowed to build their homes in a rented land. So they were living in very, very poor conditions, and now they're able to do the little homes and send their children to school.
So the next comment was that maybe Delia could explain why the working class loves Perón, since Paul can't. Delia.
Not even I can explain that, but okay, so Perón was very popular in the 1940s and mid-50s. He and his wife, Eva, installed many of the first labor laws in Argentina. So, things like they needed to have a place to sit. They needed to have vacation. If they were fired, they needed to be compensated. They need to be a minimum wage. So these are fundamental labor laws that he was the first one to bring to bear in his government. So he was really adored by the people that were benefiting from that. At the same time, and that's what is confusing, at the same time, he was a great admirer of Mussolini. So he had this fascist tendencies that that are part of his movement. They were, and he was certainly not a promoter of democracy. He was a promoter of vertical, verticality. So he was the one who was going to designate who was going to be in charge and things of that sort. So he was in exile for 18 years, if I'm not mistaken. And throughout those years, the image was, made much bigger than the person. And so so the next generation, and this is the youth, which was mostly leftist, was supporting the idea of Peronism based on all these labor laws and all these benefits that he provided for the working class. When he came back in 1972, or 71, well, thereabouts, to Argentina after almost 20 years of exile, he was immediately, elected president. At that time, he decided to designate, in his fascist fashion, his wife as the vice president. He was a very old man by then. This was his third wife, Isabel, who really was not she was not a politician. She could not govern, but nevertheless, so he designated her as the vice president. He becomes president, and he literally expulses the youth movement from his party. And this was literally so in one of his speeches at the Plaza de Mayo, where most of the youth was there with pancards celebrating him, and he expulsed them. And there is a film that shows the youth leaving the Plaza de Mayo that day.
Wow.
And his government became a right-wing government. Then he dies, and that's when Isabelita, his third wife, takes over. And a few years later, and it was a disaster. And a few years later, that's when the dictatorship that Paul was mentioning started in 1976. So after the dictatorship, several governments from the right, from the left, took on the name of Peronism. So they tried to capture the voting power that this has, or the elected power that Peronism, the name, has. But can you define them? No. You had, super liberal, neoliberal government like Menem in the 1980s. 1990s, from 1990 to 2000, which was totally neoliberal, nothing, no relationship to the left at all. And then you have the Kirchner government, which came in 2003, that also calls itself Peronist, and it has more, centrist tendencies. For instance, the laws of annulment that were passed during the Menem years were rejected by Kirchner, but I'm getting into too many details. So to answer the question, there is not one way that you can describe Peronism as such. There's not one definition. So sorry.
But just to throw in a question there, which still puzzles me, the organization we visited, MNAR, that is one of the main support organizations and a very militant one for the worker co-ops, very clearly defines themselves as Peronists, and they wanted us to know for sure that we are Peronists.
Yeah.
And that's sort of a puzzlement to me.
Yes, they want to rescue that aspect of Peronism that I was telling you about, which is the one that favors the the working class. And MNER is Movimiento Nacional de Empresas Recuperadas. So it's MN Movimiento Nacional Empresas Recuperadas, which is that movement that you well described of enterprises or businesses that went bankrupt, mostly during the collapse of 2001, and that are recuperated, put back into work by their former employees and now worker owners.
Thanks.
And there was one other question. What kind of vegetable oil is the factory producing? And I'm guessing it's sunflowers because I saw pictures of sunflowers, but I don't know.
You guess right. It's mostly sunflower oil, but they also have corn oil.
One thing actually, which I forgot to mention, is that they're very, when Raul, who was our main guide at that factory, talked about why they've been such a success. And one reason he gave is that unlike the previous owner, they're very committed to producing high quality products. And I guess that they're known for the quality of their vegetable oils. So that was one of their secrets, as well as the fact that, as he said, now he loves to come to work. All of the coordinators also work on the assembly line. And he said, now we like to come to work. Before we hated coming to work. We don't give bribes to the inspectors who then, used to sort of ignore any problems with quality or pollution. So it's just a whole shift in culture that is part of, to him, why they've been able to be such a success.
And got rid of corruption.
Right.
Because bribing the inspector is one way of corruption. Regrettably, the economic situation in Argentina is still in turmoil, and living with over 100% inflation rate is very hard.
Yeah.
So people are struggling. There is a large percentage of the population that is living in poverty, and the middle class is slowly disappearing. The governments, if you come in October, you'll be in the midst of the election cycle, which is going to be very interesting. We are in June, and the main parties still did not designate their candidates because there's so much infight that they don't even get to be able to designate their candidates. So we'll see what happens in Argentina. But yes, the economic situation is still very hard. And so the more so our admiration, or my admiration, to the people that decide to take their destiny in their own hands and make it happen and make it work through their effort and through the resources of their communities, and with dignity. And that's what I still feel is worth seeing and worth visiting.
So other questions, thoughts, comments, wonderings? Personal experience?
I'm wondering something is, do you think that with the present economic crisis, is that going to translate into more co-ops or not?
Co-op, the co-op idea is contagious, I'm told by Sergio. You know, it's very contagious. And for instance, they became a co-op, but they're not a recuperated enterprise. You know, so they took the idea and they said, well, what about us? We are a group of journalists. We can, you know, work for ourselves and create our own news organization. And they did. So they have a publication, they have a radio program, they have they teach courses. You know, they have several semester-long courses teaching journalism and photography and what they call natural journalism. So journalism about the environmental journalism, I should say. And they have been, you know, working for themselves for the last, I would say, almost 20 years.
So there's another question.
Yeah.
Kate, is school free in Argentina?
Yes, public school is free. Elementary, high school, and university.
Awesome.
So university is free, and actually the best university in Buenos Aires is the public university, La UBA, Universidad Buenos Aires. There are, of course, also private schools as well.
So why are the cooperatives starting their own schools if school is free? I'm just curious.
Because they need to, first of all, these are adult schools more than, they are not, you know, so there are adults that need to get the education that they didn't get at their time, most often because of poverty. Not that they couldn't go to school, but they couldn't, not that they couldn't pay the school because it's free, but they couldn't get there either because they had to work or for whatever reason. So
But this is a reality we know here, Kate, yes?
Yes,
yeah.
But just curious about another country.
Yeah. So the schools that are founded by the co-ops are mostly the so-called popular education schools that are geared for adults more than children.
Yeah.
And Nada, you had a question. What
Yeah.
I didn't.
Yeah, Nada, do you want to just say your question?
Sure. I saw the slogans, if I understood the Spanish about when Paul was talking about the disappeared, it looked like the consciousness was about the memory of the disappeared and saying it's not negotiable. And I'm just curious if there was a campaign either by the government or by some right-wing element in current Argentina to either erase the memory of the 30,000 disappeared, or to minimize the impact of the disappeared. I was just curious.
Absolutely, yes. Absolutely, that is exactly what happened. Or one different So for instance, I mentioned Menem, the president in the 90s, who called himself Peronist, but was, neoliberal in all his actions. And even before that, because of the pressure of the military, when the trials started against the torturers, they were threatening the democratic government. And so the government was compelled to pass laws of amnesty to the perpetrators of genocide. And so only in 2003, like 20 years later, with the Kirchner government, those laws were annulled and the trials started now, not any longer only to the upper echelon of the military, but all the others in between as well. And they're still going on, those trials. On the other side, places like the center that we visited with a group, the ESMA, which used to be a school, but then developed, a military school. And then it was a campus of the military school and then developed into a torture center. It's placed in a very high value piece of land. And so they wanted to, take it down and forget about what happened there. And so the Madres and all the human rights organizations fought very hard against that. And they maintained the school campus as it was at the time. And so that was another struggle. So yes, more than once, there were attempts to forget about it. They disappeared.
And just to add a couple of things there. First of all, at that that center, the former school that's now a museum about the disappearances, there were lots of school groups there, and you can see that there's this really strong attempt to make sure that younger folks coming up understand that history and kind of embrace the ongoing battle to make sure something like that doesn't happen again. So yeah, that it's, and then I guess I just wanted to mention, as I did earlier, for those of you who haven't seen the movie Argentina 1985, which was nominated for an Academy Award, won a Golden Globe, it really captures, this key moment when the, parts of the post-dictatorship establishment allowed these trials to go forward that wound up convicting the generals who had been at the top of the dictatorship and oversaw the torturing and disappearances. And that movie too is like an important cultural sort of product that has had a big impact within Argentina.
Yes, very much so. And I don't know if you know that Sergio, Sergio Ciancaglini, the one that you met from La Vaca, he was a young journalist at the time, and he was sent to report on that trial. So he witnessed personally that trial. Yeah.
Yeah, and I guess I should say, I don't know other histories, but most of my friends from Argentina, I think like Delia as well, left during the dictatorship because they knew people who were being disappeared and tortured and killed. So I kind of feel very much, like it's our generation that was the target of the dictatorship.
Yeah. exactly. Well, I don't know if you have any other question. I mean, Paul mentioned soccer, and indeed, the World Cup was an incredible party. You know, it was, I've never seen something like that in my life. You know, people just were pouring out of their apartments, their buildings. They just came to the street to sing and to dance. It was amazing. It was really a huge party. Everybody was happy, at least for a few minutes. And then they had to deal with inflation again. So if you're interested in coming, joining us, we need at least 6 people to sign up. I just want to mention that a large portion of the cost of the tour is devoted to contributions to the organizations that we visit. And we do the contributions in the name of the entire group, and right then and there. And also, since Westpac is a 501c3 organization, your payment would be tax deductible.
Not the entire cost.
Not the entire portion.
No, only the portion that is donated to organizations.
Okay, which is a big part of it. And what else? I don't know. Oh,
It's a great tour.
To leave on October 8th to 15th, and the elections are scheduled for the following Sunday. I think it's October 22.
So the elections for this year's tour are going to be sort of like the World Cup for last year's tour happening right after.
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah. So anybody here inspired to, well,